Okay, welcome back. We're on page 394 talking about formal versus informal kind of thing. I just can't assume that my formal reports are being received and everything is happy. I probably need to go check. The point of this is you're supposed to be nurturing these communication, nurturing these relationships. So you need to go talk to these people and say, I've been sending a bunch of these reports up and I'm not really getting any feedback. Are you guys happy with what you're seeing? And, you're trying to nurture a relationship with the stakeholders to make sure everyone's happy. And you remember the empathic listening from last chapter? Yeah, where you're trying to actually really trying to understand their point of view kind of a thing. So one of the techniques is a traditional face-to-face, right? That makes sense. There's several variants of that. One is what's called a standing meeting. All right, you go into a room, or maybe it's a loading dock or whatever, and there's no chairs. Okay, chairs mean, well, we're going to be here a while, and so everybody got to kind of get comfortable. But if it's a standing meeting, that means you're less likely to sit and talk about, hey, I had a great vacation in the Bahamas, and all sorts of stuff that's not relevant. Because you're standing, you're probably going to be getting to the topics a little bit quicker. You might consider using that technique if you have people on your team that tend to blab. Okay. They talk about how in a face-to-face scenario, your body language says a lot. The tone of voice says a lot. And then the actual content. And let me tell you, it's in that order. Most people get the idea in that order. Your body language. If you're in there pounding on the desk, that kind of stuff. So the tone of voice and all that. And actually what you're saying doesn't really matter. I mean, I look at it from like when you talk with your pets, right? If you have an angry voice and you're scolding your cat or your dog, it doesn't actually matter what English words are coming out of your mouth because they can't speak English. But they can understand the body language, and they can understand the wagging of the finger and the tone of voice, the volume level. They can get that. Well, the same thing here. Now, this is difficult to do in a video. You might think, oh, that's easy. Well, it's not. I mean, like this video right now, you've got a little square with just, chest up. Okay, so you really can't see me pacing the floor or anything. I am doing some hand gesturing, but it's not quite the same as if you're face-to-face, honest to God, being able to see their body posture a little better. Okay, so the next thing we talk about on page 395 is distributing important information. So I've got something really important to tell them. It could be bad news, it could be good news, but whatever it is, it's something that really desperately needs to go out. So an awful lot of people, good-natured people, just don't like to talk about, well, okay, we're downsizing and we're going to have to let, 5 of you guys go. And so they just say, well, oh darn, I really don't want to talk about that, so they just don't ever really get around to it. Yeah, that's bad. You really have to own up to both good and bad news. So it could be bad news pointing down to your team, saying, okay, something's up and we're going to have to fix it. It could be bad news going up the chain, like going to your supervisor saying, we're having a problem here and we're behind schedule. The idea is that, don't bury the lead. Don't try to sugarcoat it. Don't try to do that. Just come up and say, I'm sorry, our project is behind schedule. This is an entire thing talking suppressing of negative feedback. If you're scared to tell your boss that something is wrong, then you're when the boss says, is everything okay down there? You're going to say, well, yes sir. Of course it is, because you're afraid to provide impact. So in the Army, suppression of negative feedback is absolutely rampant. In fact, there was this really cool movie called The Pentagon Wars. And it's all about how the development of the Bradley fighting vehicle. But there's one particular scene in this film where the Secretary of Defense is standing there and he's saying, I'm reading in the newspaper that all these weapon systems don't work. And then, he goes to them, how about you? Is your project okay? Sure, it's fine. How about you? Is your project okay? And he says, I'm not getting any feedback from you guys. So let's just watch that for just a second. So this is from The Pentagon Wars.
Why am I learning about these things in the newspaper? It makes me look foolish. And I am not a foolish man. General Cushing, are you having any problems with the Maverick missile you're testing?
No, sir.
Admiral Morehouse, any problems with the A-12?
None whatsoever, sir.
General Partridge,
Sir?
any problems with the Bradley?
No, sir.
Frankly, I don't appreciate calls from reporters and congressmen asking me why nothing we are working on works. And I can't answer them because the men in charge of developing these systems tell me everything is just peachy.
The point here is, you ask them, okay, is everything okay? Everything is fine. No one was willing to say that there was a problem. So there was a tremendous amount of suppression of negative feedback. Okay, so open communication is almost always the preferred technique for both good and bad news. You don't want to post something on the bulletin board that says, okay, we're downsizing and 5 of you are going to be fired. That's just not the way it's done. I mean, you need to show up in person, own it, and say, good news happened or bad news happened. You can't just, do that kind of thing on a bulletin board. So they have a section here talking about setting the stage for bad news. And this is more towards pointing up the chain. So you're trying to point up the chain. You don't drop them off with a problem. You don't go to your boss and say, well, we got a problem, without turning right around and saying, and here's the solution, or here's our recommendation how to fix it. Don't wrap up the problem and give it to them as a present. Don't task your boss with solving the problem. You need to be solving the problem. That's why they hired you, for God's sakes. So you're supposed to be coming up and saying, okay, we're behind schedule, but I recommend we're doing this, this, and this, and this, and this in order to alleviate the problem or make it go faster or live with the fact that it's longer. So that's a very good piece of information. There's a very cute example on page 396 talking about suppression of negative feedback. When somebody writes home and talks about, they got their girlfriend pregnant and this, that, and the other, and at the very bottom it goes, oh yeah, well none of that's true. It's just that, I had bad grades at university. Where you give them something outrageous that they're going, and then down at the bottom it goes, no. That's trying to soften the blow of the bad news. Okay. It's funny, but not exactly appropriate in our world. So the next thing they talk about is determining the number of communication channels. This is kind of sort of weird, but basically what they're saying is, if there's only 2 people involved, it's pretty easy, right? If there's 3 people involved, well now, in order for all 3 people to come up with the exact same idea, there's a bunch more communications. And so now as the team gets in size larger and larger and larger, then now 4 people have 6 communication channels, right? And so, a little math formula, but this is not a math class. So if you have 6 or 7 people in a team, trying to keep them all straight is going to be kind of tough because there's an awful lot of ways that people could communicate this stuff. So when a face-to-face kind of a scenario is not practical, then some sort of electronic form will have to do. Group emails, that's a good one, where you blast out something to a group. Okay. You can post on some sort of a bulletin board system, a wiki page or something, sort of like updating your Facebook status, but being project status. That kind of sort of works. The next thing they talk about is planning, communication management. So now we're back to this guy. We're talking about planning. Okay, cool. So the communications management plan. You're going to produce a plan that says how we're going to talk. And there's a bullet list on page 389 that talks about what ought to be in that plan. So let's go through the list. The first one's going to be the communication requirements of the stakeholder. It could be a stakeholder is going to say, I want a monthly report or a quarterly report or a weekly report. So you need to know that. You need to figure out what information that you're going to provide. Okay, they wanted a report, but what's in the report? Who's going to produce this report and who's going to receive it? If you don't task someone with producing the report, then it's probably not going to get done. And this is not something that you would give to the admin staff, okay? You wouldn't get, the low level, I'm going to use the word secretary, although that's probably not appropriate anymore, but some sort of an admin person, the lowest person in the entire organization, say, here, type up this status report for the boss. That's probably not the way it works, because they're not going to have the nuances of what's actually going on. So what technologies are you going to be using for this? The frequency of these reports, the formatting of it. How do you escalate if there's a problem? So I have a report and I go, whoa, there's something wrong with this. We're off plan. How does a report tell me where to go to escalate an issue? Most of these reports have a revision number and a date. So if you make changes to it, you can track that, I once said this, but now I'm saying this, that kind of thing. And then maybe even a glossary of terms. Because maybe we talked about all the jargon. Don't assume that everyone understands, what all these words mean. So that's the requirements of a communications plan. Okay, basically they really ought to be tailor-made for each of these stakeholders. So there's this cool little chart here that talks about, here are the stakeholders, and here's what kind of report, and here's what kind of format, and here's the contact, and here's when it's due. You probably need to come up with something like this to keep track of it all, because communications is kind of complicated. So, for example, in the syllabus, I mentioned that I prefer email over phone calls. That's what it said in a very first introductory video. That's what it says in the syllabus. So I'm a stakeholder, and I've told you my preferred document format. I've told you that I prefer email. Okay? So that's exactly what we're talking about. Is some stakeholders have certain preferences, and you should try your best to keep track of that. Who's their contact people that you send it to, and when is it due, and all the rest of those good things. Just as a side note, you might have people who are very, very interested in something, but you probably don't necessarily want to invite them to every single meeting. So this is talking about documents, but let's just expand this subject to talk about meetings. If you're going to have a weekly meeting with your staff, you probably don't need to involve like the project sponsor. That's way, way too high up. And maybe they don't really want to attend all these meetings, so pick carefully who it is. Do the same thing, this document thing, do the same thing, but just for meetings. Who would you normally invite and when and why? All that kind of good stuff. So same thing, just with meetings. The next one we talk about is managing. So this was the communications management plan part. Now we're trying to manage those things. And if you recall, this is the place where you actually generate the information and disseminate it to others, blah, 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 blah. So there's a cool phrase here. It talks about getting the right info to the right people at the right time. So in order for people to make decisions, they need lots and lots of information, and they get information via communication. Way cool. And they talk about is once you've gotten into this, perhaps you're going to make changes to your communication plan. Like, Bob Thompson here, he doesn't really need it monthly anymore. So maybe we're going to change this. So you need to keep track of the changes to your management plan. And once again, we've come up on the 15-minute mark. So you know what we're going to do.